Good morning, YouTube. It's 10 a.m. in the great state of Texas. And what are we doing today? We got some dial rods and a faceplate and a bunch of these sticks that have just basically been hanging out in the workshop for like years. And we got some out of focus blue dye and some black diamond pigment. We're going to mix all this together, get everything cut down, and we're going to try to make a little something different. So it's a scrap wood project, but we're doing it with just dial rods. So something a little bit out of the ordinary on this one. And oh yeah, don't forget the actual container that it's going to go in. So got these dial rods. I've been using them for some other projects that I've done in the past, and they've just all been hanging out, and I do not recall having these many. But apparently I did just have them laying around the house. I don't even remember what I used them for. It's been so long. But anyway, getting them just cut down on the bandsaw here. And they're a variety of woods, which I will find out later. They are just not simple pine rods. So getting everything just cut down to maybe an inch, inch and a half in size, basically. Getting them all nice and cut. You can see here, going to take my hot glue gun because it wouldn't be a Salty Texas project without a hot glue gun. So getting everything just mixed up real nice and neat. Gonna end up using that faceplate. I just don't want them to float in the resin, so that's why we kind of made that little rod in the middle, and then we're just gonna take the faceplate, put them on there so they stay down the way that we want them to. Mixing up some Total Boat resin, got this ink in there, and then we're just gonna take that, mix it up real nice and neat, and then we're gonna end up taking our pigment and mixing that up in there as well. So get like a hodgepodge type of color presentation, and I love that black diamond. Absolute favorite pigment. It looks absolutely gorgeous every time I mix it up. So once we got the resin mixed up, now we're just pouring that into our little container here, and you can see that there's a little bit of a bubble there. You can see on the left side of the container, getting all of that mixed in there real nice and neat. Really like the aesthetic effect of this initially, but 4.5 hours in the pressure pot, things don't really turn out the way that you envision. So once we got all of that in there, let the bubbles pop a little bit, and then we're going to go ahead and just throw that into the actual pressure pot for the next 4.5 hours. Boom! Take that out of the container, give it a nice little flip, and boop, comes right out. Love the swirl, love the color. Do not love these big gaping epoxy gaps for some reason. I don't know how the hell that happened. Things happen in a pressure pot. You put things in a pressure pot, and then they come out all weird and wonky sometimes. And this is a project that definitely happens in. So gonna have to drive on. Doesn't matter. We still got this epoxy. Still gotta make it work. So in typical Salty Texas fashion, taking the hot glue gun, getting that all nice and glued up. Now we're just taking our scrap pine, coming around on the edges to make sure that nothing comes off, because the last thing that you want is something to come off and hit you in the face, because that has happened before. And like I said in last week's video, go back and watch some of my earlier projects. Definitely happened a couple of times. So getting the faceplate screwed on there nice and neat and snug as a bug, and then we're just going to throw this onto the lathe itself, give it a good spin. And now we have the daunting task of making everything nice and even, and we're going to have to somehow get that giant gap that's in the epoxy taken down. So with most of the projects, we're just getting that superficial layer taken off like we usually will do, just coming back, hitting it with a gouge, making sure everything on the tools are nice and sharp, trying to save as much material as possible. And that was kind of my thinking going into this one. When I saw that giant gap that was in there, my first instinct was, okay, we want to get it taken down, but we don't want to take down so much in the material that it's basically just like a small cylinder, because that's what ends up happening sometimes, is when you have gaps like that. And yes, I could have gone back and put epoxy in there and try to make it even, but I'm kind of under a time crunch because of some work stuff. I'm trying to get these videos done and taken care of so we can keep feeding the algorithm that is YouTube. But it's going to turn out pretty well in the end, even though we kind of skipped a step, and I could have gone back and fixed it, but I just didn't have the time to do it. So anyway, getting everything nice and even, and basically by this point I've decided, okay, there's going to be a gap in there, so I'm not going to try to stress it as much as I would have normally. So once we've got the cylinder to a nice shape that we want it to, got everything nice and even for the most part, now we're just coming back and hitting it with the square carbide tool, and then we're going to start the process of making a mortise, this part went relatively easy, not a whole lot of problems from this part. I think I had a little bit of chatter on the bottom portion of it, but overall this part went relatively even. So once we did that, we got everything sized up. Now it's time to take off the faceplate, and we're going to go back and put it on the lathe once we've reversed it. So there's the bottom, and now we're ready to go. And like I do normally, we're just taking that waste pine block and just gouging it out instead of just using the process of just taking a chisel and popping it off. This just seems to work a little bit easier. Plus, once you put all that glue on there, you can't really use the pine for anything else. So it served its purpose, and it's time to go. So once we get all that done, now we're just taking the superficial layer off, just getting everything nice and even before we start the actual process of gouging. And gouging is going to be a pain in the ass on this project. And there's my head, just in the shot ruining everything. So once we got that to the way that I want it, now we're starting the gouging part. So the top layer, not a lot of issues. You can see there we're getting a lot of nice clean ribbons off, a nice amount of shavings. Everything on this portion of it's going relatively easy. But once we start to get a little bit further down in there where the wood blocks are or the wood dials are, we're going to have a shit ton of problems. I forget how difficult it is to work with both epoxy and wood at the same time. I've done a lot of projects like that in the past. However, the wood wasn't pine. So some of this is like pine, which is a nice soft wood, and then others of it are just, I assume, some kind of redwood or some kind of like red oak, because man, I had a lot of problems on the chisels. Like once I got like deep in there, like midway about around this time, I just could not get good clean shavings. And my tools were sharp, everything was relatively well, and you can see there was a slight pause in the epoxy, and I'm trying to gouge it out the best I can, but I'm just getting so much negative feedback on the chisel that it's just pure aggravation at this point. So took a minute, reset, and now we're just basically just gouging, doing most of the work with the round and the square carbide tool. The gouge itself was pretty much useless up to this point. I was getting such little material off that it was kind of a pain. And then once you start getting into the deeper portions of the project, then you really start to have a lot more issues because you can't get the angle that you want on it. And then once it kind of narrows at the bottom and cones a little bit, then you start to have a lot more difficulty on the chisel. But I'm trying my absolute best and trying not to get aggravated. And believe me, there are times when I literally want to punch the actual blank, but that's not smart because it's a lathe and that would definitely mess up your hand, so don't do that. So best thing to do is just to kind of take a break and take a minute away from it when you kind of get aggravated like that. But lots of aggravation once we started the gouging process of getting this bowl done. But you can see here now we're just taking the square carbide tool, really taking our time on the edges here, trying to get it to a nice depth that we want it to be. And aesthetically, this bowl overall is very pleasing, but man, it was a super pain to gouge this out, and not a fun project at all. But here we are, once we got it to the bottom. And the other problem was just how some of these rods were. Like if you hit it from the side or gouged it from the side, not a lot of issues, but straight on, a lot of problems depending on the grain and what angle you were coming at. But here's the shavings, a lot of shavings for such a small project. Not a small project, it was definitely larger than last week's project, but overall, project-wise, aesthetically pleasing, but it was a pain in the ass to get to this point. So now we're just sanding, going all the way from 340, 380, going all the way up to 1500 with the dry sanding. And then we're going to come back and hit it with a micro mesh, doing our wet sanding like we typically do. Since there was a lot of wood involved, we didn't do a lot of wet sanding. It was most of the material was worked down just using the dry sanding. But overall, aesthetically pleasing, like I said. There was this little bit of a gap in there, but I think next time that we do this, we can definitely get a better, feel for the chisels and get a better result. Even though the end result is definitely aesthetically pleasing, it was just, like I said, a absolute pain to get there. But overall, project went relatively well, other than the gouging portion of it, and it looks really cool. I love the way the dials look in the wood, and you get different textures with the different types of woods and the different grains depending on how they set up in the epoxy and how we gouge them out. But overall, really happy with it. So there it is, nice, done, and neat. I think it looks, aesthetically pleasing. I love these blues. So overall, hope you guys like the project. Don't forget to subscribe, all that good stuff that every YouTuber says, and I'll see you guys in the next project. Peace. Alright, so the project is done, and here we are. Little blue swirly thing where you can see all these cool little dial rods that I put in there. And I'm sure I went over in the commentary, this was a huge pain in the ass. Oh my god. Just the different types of woods that these dials are made out of. I mean, it looks aesthetically pleasing, but damn it if it didn't take a lot of patience to get here. And you can see the bottom, there's the mortise, and then you see these bubbling kind of, I don't know why the hell it did that in the pressure pot, but decided, you know, I didn't want to take that off because of the material, and then it would have been too small. It would have kind of just taken away from everything we were trying to build. So, I mean, overall, aesthetically pleasing, just a pain in the ass to get to this point. So today is October 23rd, 2021. You guys are probably watching this in March-ish, somewhere around there. But there it is. I don't know what I'm going to call this one. Pain in the ass, that's what I'm going to call it probably. But hope you liked it. Hope you got something out of it. Don't forget to subscribe, like it, everything that every YouTuber says. And I'll see you guys in the next project. All right, peace.